Detroit, Michigan. The roar of trucks thundered above the I-75 overpass, headlights slicing through the frigid night air. Beneath the concrete pillars, where the cold sank deep into the bones, an old woman curled up on a piece of cardboard. To most passers-by, she was invisible, a shadow among shadows, just another forgotten soul. But if anyone paused long enough, they would notice her lips moving, not in complaint or despair, but in prayer, whispered words lifted to the heavens. They called her Cardboard Auntie. Every night, she pulled that worn piece of cardboard from beneath the bridge, spread it carefully on the ground as if it were a sacred ritual, and knelt upon it. The traffic above drowned out most sounds, but her prayer carried on like a quiet flame in the wind. Holy Mother, thank you for another day. If I don't wake tomorrow, let it be in your embrace. No house, no family, no warm meal. Yet, in her eyes, there remained something unbreakable, a faith that refused to falter. Detroit had seen homelessness before, but there was something different about her, an aura of peace, as if unseen hands were holding her up. That night seemed no different from the countless nights she had survived in silence. But soon, the piece of cardboard the world mocked as trash would become the stage of a miracle, and America would never look at the poor the same way again. Before she became known as Cardboard Auntie, her name was Mei-Ling Chen. At 72, her story had already carried more loss than most could endure. Mei-Ling once had a life that looked ordinary, even hopeful. She had worked as a seamstress in Michigan, stitching wedding gowns and prom dresses for girls who dreamed of brighter tomorrows. Her husband, Wei Zhang, was a quiet man with kind hands who spent his years on the assembly line at a car plant. Together, they built a modest home and filled it with plans for children, laughter, and stability. But life in Detroit does not always unfold as planned. The children never came. Doctors spoke of complications, treatments, and costs they could never afford. When Wei fell sick with cancer, Mei-Ling sold her sewing machines and the house itself to cover bills. She sat by his bedside every night, holding his hand as his body grew weaker, whispering prayers into the quiet. When he finally passed, Mei-Ling was left with nothing but debts and memories. At first, she rented a small apartment, working odd jobs, cleaning houses, babysitting. But arthritis stiffened her joints, diabetes stole her strength, and the little money she had vanished in prescriptions and overdue bills. By the time she was 70, the landlord knocked on her door with an eviction notice. With no children to help, no savings to cushion the fall, she stepped onto the streets carrying only a torn grocery bag filled with documents, a faded photo of Wei, and an old prayer bead her mother had given her. Detroit winters are unforgiving. The first nights outside cut through her like knives. She tried shelters, but they were overcrowded and unsafe. She reached out to distant relatives, but their lives were already heavy with their own struggles. Slowly, she learned the unwritten rules of survival, where to find water, which churches served soup on Tuesdays, which alleys offered a few hours of quiet. Then came the day she found it, the cardboard. It had once been the packaging for a refrigerator, tossed aside behind an appliance store. To everyone else, it was trash. To her, it was salvation. She folded it under her arm like treasure, and from then on, it became her bed, her shield, her closest companion. Every morning, she folded it with care, as if it were silk. Every night, she laid it out with the reverence of one preparing an altar. Some mocked her as she walked by with the cardboard tucked under her arm. "There goes the crazy old lady with her portable bed," they sneered. Others ignored her completely, as city dwellers train themselves to ignore what makes them uncomfortable. Yet, even in the face of cruelty, Mei-Ling's lips would form the same quiet words, "Forgive them, Holy Mother. They don't see what you see." Her world had collapsed into a single piece of cardboard, yet she guarded it with a dignity no cold night, no cruel word, and no empty stomach could steal. Every night, when the city lights dimmed and the bitter wind settled under the overpass, Mei-Ling knelt on her piece of cardboard. The pavement was hard, the air damp with the smell of gasoline and rust. But her prayer rose above it all. She did not beg for money or food. She did not ask for a warm apartment or new clothes. Instead, her voice, thin, cracked, but steady, whispered the same words, "Holy Mother, thank you for another day. If I don't wake tomorrow, let it be in your embrace." Truck drivers passing above never knew that beneath them, a 72-year-old woman was praying with a devotion most temples never see. Sometimes, other homeless souls shuffled past and paused, surprised by the sight. They would see her knees pressing into cold cement, her wrinkled hands clutching prayer beads with missing links, her eyes closed in peace. Some laughed, shaking their heads. Others lingered quietly, unsettled by the strength radiating from such fragility. Mei-Ling never preached. She never told others what to believe. She simply prayed aloud, her words drifting like incense in the night. In those whispered prayers, she carried the names of strangers, other women in line at the soup kitchen, men coughing through sleepless nights, children she had never met. Each night, she entrusted them to the heavens, convinced that a divine presence still stooped down to comfort the forgotten. There were times when hunger clawed so fiercely at her stomach that her whole body trembled. On those nights, temptation whispered, "Why keep praying? Has anyone answered you?" Yet, every time doubt rose, Mei Ling would press the prayer beads to her lips and remember her mother's voice from decades past: the heavens never abandon their children, even when the world does. That faith did not remove the pain. It did not magically bring food or warmth, but it wrapped her in a strange serenity that startled those who mocked her. One police officer once kicked her cardboard and barked, "Move along. You're not welcome here." Mei Ling simply gathered her belongings and said, "Bless you, young man. May the heavens watch over you." The officer froze, disarmed by words he did not expect. Her life was stripped bare, yet her spirit remained unshaken. No house, no family, no possessions worth stealing. Yet each night, Mei Ling Chen's cardboard became more than bedding. It became an altar, a sanctuary where heaven touched the earth. Mei Ling had nothing left to give except the one thing the world could not take away: her unshakable faith. It was on one of Detroit's coldest mornings, when hunger gnawed at her insides like a knife, that she found a stale dinner roll in a trash bin behind a diner, her only meal in 2 days. She held it close, her fingers trembling with cold and need. Every part of her body begged her to eat. That's when she saw him. A pit bull, ribs jutting out like fragile sticks beneath its skin, staggered into the alley. Its eyes were wild, desperate, and it growled at the sight of the bread in her hand. Most would have thrown rocks, shouted, or run. Mei Ling did none of these. She stood still, meeting the animal's gaze with a calmness that seemed out of place. The dog crept closer, teeth bared, ready to fight for survival. Slowly, Mei Ling broke the bread in half, her voice, fragile but gentle, carrying through the icy air. "Here, little one, you're hungry too." She laid the piece on the ground and slid it toward him. The dog sniffed, snatched it up, and dashed into the shadows. Mei Ling sat back on her cardboard, her stomach roaring with disappointment. She pressed her hands against her chest and whispered, "Holy Mother, I'll be fine." He needed it more. What she didn't know was that someone had seen it. Across the street, leaning against his van, a local news reporter named Jian Haoli had been filming a story about crime in the neighborhood. His camera caught everything: the gaunt dog, the trembling woman, and the moment she gave away her only food. Jianhao lowered his camera slowly, stunned. In years of covering violence, corruption, and loss, he had rarely seen something so quietly heroic. For Mei Ling, it was nothing extraordinary. She believed every creature, human or animal, was watched over by a divine presence. Sharing her bread was simply natural, even if it meant she would go hungry. But for Jianhao, and soon for the world, this single act of kindness would become the spark that lit a fire far greater than Mei Ling could imagine. December in Detroit carried a cruel wind. On that day, the city square downtown buzzed with noise. A stage had been set up beneath banners reading Detroit Renewal Initiative. Politicians and businessmen in crisp suits spoke through loudspeakers, promising to end poverty, restore dignity, and bring hope to the city. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes, and schoolchildren in clean uniforms clapped at the right moments. At the edge of the crowd, unnoticed at first, stood Mei Ling. Her cardigan was frayed, her shoes patched with duct tape, and her cardboard folded neatly under her arm like a flag of her identity. She didn't push forward or shout. She simply stood with her faint smile, listening as men in expensive coats declared a war on homelessness without once looking into her eyes. Then it happened. From the stage, a visiting businessman pointed in her direction. His microphone caught his words, amplifying them for all to hear. "And what about that old woman over there? Is she the future we're talking about?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. The mayor smirked and leaned into the microphone. "She's been around for years, sleeps on cardboard under the bridge. Some people just can't be helped." The laughter grew louder. A city official added, "I once saw her eating scraps out of a dumpster behind KFC. That's her level." The cruelty crashed down on Mei Ling like hailstones, amplified through the sound system. She lowered her gaze, her cheeks burning, but her dignity did not falter. She clutched her cardboard tighter, as if it were armor. The crowd, emboldened, jeered openly. Then, as if to drive the humiliation deeper, a woman in a red designer coat stepped off the stage, carrying a plate from the buffet table, a thick sandwich stacked with meat and cheese. Cameras turned, capturing the spectacle. The woman smiled for the press and said, "Here you go, Auntie. You must be starving." Mei Ling's eyes lit up. Her wrinkled hands reached forward with genuine gratitude. But just before they touched the sandwich, the woman let it fall. It hit the pavement with a sickening splat, the bread splitting, the filling scattering into dirt. "Oops," the woman said with a laugh that never touched her eyes. "But you're used to eating off the ground, aren't you? Go ahead, pick it up." The crowd howled with laughter. Phones came out. A photographer snapped the moment, the old woman kneeling before trampled food. Mei Ling did not curse or lash out. Slowly, with the delicacy of one gathering flowers for an altar, she picked up each piece of the ruined sandwich. Her hands shook, not from shame, but from age and hunger. She brushed off the dirt with the hem of her dress, tucking the broken meal into her torn plastic bag. Her lips moved, but no one heard the words except perhaps the heavens. Forgive them, Holy Mother. They don't know what they do. The laughter rolled on, sharp and merciless, until she disappeared into the market stalls. For the politicians, the show went on, promises, speeches, statistics. For the crowd, the incident became a cruel joke to retell later. But not everyone laughed. In the shadows at the back of the square, a man with a camera stood frozen. Reporter Jianhao Li had seen violence and tragedy in his career, but never had he witnessed such quiet dignity in the face of public humiliation. His finger pressed record, capturing every second. He didn't know it yet, but this video would shake America and change Mei Ling's life forever. That night, in a small apartment on the east side of Detroit, Jianhao sat alone at his desk. The glow of his computer screen illuminated his tired face as he replayed the footage again and again. He had covered shootings, fires, and political scandals, but none had pierced him like this. On the screen, Mei Ling bent to the ground, her frail body framed by jeering faces. He watched the sandwich fall, watched the heel crush it, watched her gather the pieces with trembling dignity. Each time, the same knot tightened in his chest. He opened his editing software, trimmed the clip, and muted the voices of the officials. He wanted no distractions, no villains, no names, only her. In simple text, he typed across the screen, "Cardboard auntie. True dignity cannot be destroyed." At 11:47 p.m., Jianhao Li pressed upload. The video went to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all his accounts. With less than 1,000 followers combined, he expected a few likes, maybe a handful of shares. Then he shut his laptop and went to bed. By sunrise, his phone was buzzing uncontrollably. Notifications flooded his screen faster than he could read them. The clip had exploded, hundreds of thousands of views within hours, millions by the end of the day. By lunchtime, the hashtag #CardboardAuntie was trending nationwide. Comments poured in, "I'm crying at 6 a.m. This woman has more grace than anyone I know. I'm not religious, but this feels holy. She's an angel among us. How can we find her? How can we help?" Influencers reposted it. Celebrities tweeted it, Opticon news anchors referenced it on morning shows. The video crossed borders, appearing on feeds in London, Sao Paulo, and Seoul. Beyond the numbers and views, something deeper stirred. People didn't just watch, they acted. Donations to shelters surged. Volunteers signed up at soup kitchens. Strangers handed blankets and food to the homeless in their neighborhoods. All of it traced back to one frail woman folding her dignity into a piece of cardboard under a Detroit bridge. What Mei Ling didn't know as she prayed that night under the freeway, prayer beads in hand, was that her prayer had already been answered. The heavens had taken her story, her humiliation, her cardboard bed, and turned it into a light for the world to see. By the afternoon of the third day, the video had surpassed 20 million views. Television anchors debated it, podcasts dissected it, and temples across America played it during Sunday sermons. One question echoed everywhere: who is she? Reporters scoured Detroit, waving screenshots from the viral clip. Volunteers from local temples, social workers, and strangers who saw the video online walked the streets, asking, "Do you know this woman, the one with the cardboard?" Answers varied. Some rolled their eyes, "Oh, her. She's crazy, always praying like someone's listening. Waste of time." Others softened, "She's kind. She gave me half her soup when I was sick. I've seen her blessing kids on their way to school. She never asks for anything." A street vendor near a bus stop leaned over his cart of newspapers and pointed under the highway. "She sleeps down there every night. Folks call her Cardboard Auntie. Real name Mei Ling, I think." That evening, Jianhao returned to the bridge where he had first seen her, this time with two fellow journalists, a pair of social workers carrying blankets and food, and a woman named Sujin Park, a representative of a Buddhist foundation from Chicago. Sujin had flown to Detroit after watching the video, determined to meet the woman whose faith had touched her heart. They found Mei Ling exactly as described, curled up on her cardboard, clutching her worn grocery bag, prayer beads dangling from her fingers. When she stirred awake and saw the group, her first instinct was fear. She struggled to sit up, whispering, "I'm sorry. Am I in your way? I'll move." Jianhao's voice cracked as he knelt beside her. "No, ma'am. Please don't move. We came to find you." Mei Ling blinked in confusion. Invisible for so long, she couldn't imagine why strangers, well-dressed, kind-eyed strangers, would seek her out. In that moment, as cameras quietly recorded, the story of Cardboard Auntie shifted. For the first time in years, Mei Ling was no longer hidden beneath a bridge. She was seen. Mei Ling thought it was a dream. The lights, the faces, the kind voices, it felt like something her mind had conjured to ease the loneliness of another night. But as Jianhao helped her sit up and Su Jin draped a blanket over her shoulders, she realized it was real. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice fragile. "I'm just an old woman with a piece of cardboard." Su Jin knelt beside her, taking her hand. "No, Mei Ling. You're the woman who reminded the world what dignity looks like. Millions have seen you. They're not laughing. They're praying, donating, asking how they can help. They want to meet the woman who never lost her faith." Tears welled in Mei Ling's eyes. She shook her head. "I don't understand. I didn't do anything special. I only prayed and tried to share what little I had." The group invited her to a nearby temple hall, where a monk had opened the doors for warmth and privacy. Cameras waited outside, but inside was quiet, lit by the soft glow of candles. Mei Ling looked around as though stepping into paradise itself. The monk, Master Liang, placed a plate of hot food before her. Mei Ling's hands trembled as she folded them in prayer, whispering, "Thank you, Holy Mother," before taking her first bite. That night, as she slept in a real bed for the first time in years, something extraordinary unfolded. Donations poured in, hundreds, then thousands, then millions. A Buddhist foundation announced a national fund for the homeless in her name. Volunteers flooded Detroit's streets with blankets, food, and medicine. News anchors called her the soul of America's conscience. The most remarkable moment came the next morning. Mei Ling awoke in the temple's guest room, her cardboard folded neatly by her bedside. She reached for her prayer beads, knelt, and prayed as always. Suddenly, the room filled with a warmth unlike any radiator's heat. Mei Ling later described it as a mother's embrace wrapping around me. She lifted her gaze to a small statue of Guanyin on the dresser. For an instant, the statue seemed alive, eyes tender, lips almost moving. Mei Ling swore she heard a voice, not with her ears but with her heart, "My daughter, you have given when you had nothing. You have shared when you were hungry. Now watch as the divine multiplies what you offered. You are not forgotten. You will be my hands for those still lost in the streets." Mei Ling wept, clutching the prayer beads tight against her chest. Whether it was a vision, dream, or grace, she believed every word. Later that day, at a press conference crowded with reporters, Su Jin announced the creation of Guanin's Hope for All, a foundation dedicated to building shelters and soup kitchens across the country. When asked who would lead it, she turned and pointed to Mei Ling. Gasps filled the room. Cameras flashed. Mei Ling, bewildered, shook her head. "No, I'm not fit. I'm just an old woman." Su Jin smiled. "That's exactly why. Because you never forgot where you came from, and because your faith is already changing the world." Mei Ling Chen finally nodded, "But with one condition, let me sleep on my cardboard once a week, so I never forget the bridge, the cold, and those still waiting for their miracle." The room fell silent, and in that silence, the miracle had truly arrived. Within weeks, the effects of Guanin's Hope for All were visible on Detroit's streets. The first shelter opened in a renovated temple basement, offering 50 clean beds, hot meals, and medical care. Lines stretched around the block, but unlike other shelters, there was no shouting, no fear. People entered with heads held a little higher, knowing this place was built not from pity, but from love. Mei Ling insisted on being there every morning. She didn't sit in an office or sign papers from afar. At dawn, she arrived with her simple coat and that familiar piece of cardboard tucked under her arm. Volunteers watched in awe as she greeted each person by name, even those she'd met only once. "Good morning, Wei Jun. How's your cough today? Hi, Mei Hua. Did your grandson get the shoes we found for him? Bless you, Liang. The heavens haven't forgotten you." For those living on the edge of despair, hearing their names spoken with such tenderness was more healing than the soup or medicine. Soon, soup kitchens popped up, not just in Detroit, but in Chicago, Cleveland, and Milwaukee. A mobile medical van, staffed by doctors inspired by Mei Ling's story, made rounds under bridges, checking blood pressure, treating infections, and offering hope where hospitals had long stopped coming. The most radical change, however, wasn't in buildings or programs, it was in people's hearts. Merchants who once chased Mei Ling away now set aside food donations every evening. Children from nearby schools organized blanket drives instead of bake sales. Neighbors who had walked past the homeless for years now stopped, smiled, and asked, "How are you today?" Detroit began to feel different. A city hardened by decline and violence started to soften at the edges. Reporters called it the Mei Ling effect. Monks spoke of it in teachings. Local leaders who had laughed at her now quoted her words on television. Through it all, Mei Ling kept her vow. One night each week, she left the shelter's warmth, returned to her spot under the I-75 overpass, and laid out her cardboard. Some thought it strange, even foolish, but to Mei Ling, it was sacred. "If I forget the bridge," she said softly, "I'll forget the one still out here. And the Holy Mother didn't lift me up so I could turn my back." For Detroit, the miracle was no longer just a viral video, it had become a movement. One woman's faith multiplied into thousands of acts of kindness, reshaping a community from the inside out. What began under a Detroit bridge soon leapt far beyond the city. News stations across the United States replayed the clip of Mei Ling gathering her crushed sandwich with quiet dignity, her lips whispering prayers. Late-night hosts spoke of her, not with sarcasm, but with awe. The story crossed oceans. In London, newspapers ran headlines, "Cardboard Auntie teaches the world dignity." In Brazil, monks spoke of her faith during gatherings. In the Philippines, entire communities lit candles before statues of Guanyin, praying for Mei Ling and the movement she inspired. The Buddhist community recognized something unique in her witness. What no doctrine or policy could achieve, Mei Ling's simple faith had done. She reminded millions that poverty was not statistics, but faces, not numbers, but names. Invitations began arriving. Universities asked her to speak. Non-profits requested her guidance. The most surprising call came from New York. The United Nations wanted her to address the General Assembly during a session on human dignity. Mei Ling hesitated. "I'm no speaker. I don't know the language of politicians." But Master Liang encouraged her, "You don't need polished words. You only need the truth of your heart. That's what the world is longing for." On the day of her speech, the Grand Hall of the UN stood silent as Mei Ling, dressed in her simple coat, stepped to the podium. In her hands, she carried not a script, but the folded piece of cardboard that had been her bed. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "Good morning. My name is Mei Ling Chen. For 2 years, this cardboard was my home under a bridge in Detroit. People laughed at me, stepped over me, called me useless. But the Holy Mother never turned away. She taught me that poverty is not the absence of money, it is the absence of love. And love can be restored if we dare to see one another as family." When she finished, the hall erupted in applause. Delegates from dozens of nations stood, many with tears streaming down their faces. Mei Ling had not delivered a political plan, she had delivered a reminder echoing the heart of compassion that no one is forgotten. After her UN speech, Mei Ling could no longer walk unnoticed through a crowd. Yet she remained the same woman who folded her cardboard carefully each night. She refused luxury, choosing to live simply so the mission could grow. With the surge of donations and support, the foundation launched its boldest initiative, Guanyin's University of Compassion. It wasn't a traditional school, no ivy-covered walls or lecture halls. The professors were men and women who had once slept on sidewalks, subway stations, and under bridges, people who knew suffering firsthand. The curriculum was unlike any in the world: how to forgive when you've been wronged, how to share when you have nothing left, how to find dignity when the world calls you worthless, how to see the divine presence in the darkest nights. Students included business executives, college graduates, monks, and even politicians. They sat shoulder to shoulder with the poor, listening as former addicts, veterans, and single-OTA mothers spoke about resilience and faith. For many, it was the first time they saw poverty not as an abstract issue, but as a teacher. Across America, people began to change. Employers created second-chance programs to hire the homeless. High schools required students to volunteer at shelters. Families who once ignored beggars now carried food in their cars to hand out at intersections. The Mei Ling effect spread, a quiet revolution sparked by one woman's unshakable faith and a piece of cardboard that became a global symbol of dignity. The movement spread globally. In Mexico City, homeless shelters displayed cardboard signs painted with the phrase that had become the university's motto: "Those who give when they have nothing will receive without measure." In Madrid, a temple converted its hall into a cardboard classroom. In Nairobi, children wrote Mei Ling's name on their notebooks, calling her Auntie of Hope. The media called it a revolution of compassion, but Mei Ling always redirected the credit. "Don't look at me," she told a CNN reporter. "Look to the Holy Mother. She taught me to keep loving even when I had nothing." Her story touched not only individuals but entire systems. City governments reconsidered their treatment of the homeless. Temples renewed their outreach. Universities studied her as a case in ethics and compassion. Through it all, Mei Ling remained grounded. Every week, she slept one night under her bridge, laying out her cardboard with reverence. Volunteers sometimes joined her, placing their own pieces beside hers in solidarity. It became a ritual of remembrance, that miracles begin not in palaces, but in forgotten corners where faith clings to survival. By the time Mei Ling turned 80, Guanyin's University of Compassion had become a global symbol. It stood not just for one woman's story, but for a worldwide awakening, that dignity does not depend on wealth, but on love. At the center was an elderly woman with silver hair, a fragile body, and eyes that shone with childlike faith, living proof that the divine had transformed cardboard into a beacon of hope. Mei Ling lived to see her 82nd year. Her hair turned completely white, her steps slowed, but her eyes carried the same light that had once burned beneath the I-75 bridge. The world called her the richest woman alive, not for money, but for the love she multiplied across nations. Her final years were a blend of global recognition and personal humility. She met presidents, received humanitarian awards, and stood on a stage in Oslo as the Nobel Peace Prize was placed in her hands. When reporters asked what the honor meant, she lifted her cardboard and said, "This is my real prize. This is where the Holy Mother found me." On cold Detroit nights, she still returned to her bridge once a week. Volunteers and former homeless friends often joined her, spreading their own cardboard beside hers. To them, it was no longer a sign of poverty, but of solidarity. Mei Ling would smile and whisper, "Remember, the Holy Mother walked with me here first, and she walks with you, too." Her passing came quietly. She had insisted, as always, on sleeping one more night under the bridge. Wrapped in a thin blanket, the cardboard beneath her, she prayed her familiar words, "Holy Mother, thank you for another day. If I don't wake tomorrow, let it be in your embrace." At dawn, she did not wake. News of her death swept the world. In Detroit, thousands filled the streets, carrying pieces of cardboard with prayers written on them. In Mexico City, Manila, Rome, and Nairobi, candlelight vigils burned through the night. Social media lit up with a single phrase, "We are all cardboard children." Her funeral was the largest Detroit had seen in generations. Homeless men in donated suits walked beside CEOs in tailored jackets. Children carried flowers. Choirs sang hymns of compassion. As the casket passed, people raised their pieces of cardboard high, turning the city into a sea of makeshift altars. The Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C., requested her original cardboard. It now rests in a glass case with a bronze plaque, the bed of the woman who taught the world that true wealth is love. Yet her legacy did not end with memorials. Guanin's University of Compassion expanded, reaching 50 countries within a decade. Homeless individuals became teachers, communities became families, and governments reshaped policies with dignity at their core. Through every new shelter, classroom, and meal served, Mei Ling's spirit lived on. Years later, a little girl in Detroit was asked what she wanted to be when she grew up. Without hesitation, she held up a folded piece of cardboard and said, "I want to be like Auntie Mei Ling. I want to help the Holy Mother change the world." The story of Mei Ling Chen, Cardboard Auntie, proved something the world had nearly forgotten: miracles are not rare spectacles reserved for the powerful. They are born in ordinary choices, sharing a crust of bread, forgiving cruelty, praying on cold pavement. Sometimes, the divine uses the weakest vessel to show the greatest strength. Mei Ling died on a piece of cardboard, but she lives forever in the countless lives she touched, the dignity she restored, and the love she multiplied. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful story of faith, dignity, and the gentle hand of compassion. If Mei Ling's journey touched your heart, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs hope today, and don't forget to subscribe to Touched by Grace. Together, let's keep spreading stories that remind the world miracles still happen.